Hello there, thanks for joining us on the news segment of Delsu Echo. I'm Faith Ashima. Nigerian scholars have called on the federal government to institute social protection measures that will ameliorate the growing hardship arising from the removal of fuel subsidy in the country. The scholars specifically enjoined the government to address key issues in the health, housing, and transportation sectors and promote policies that will improve the physical, political, and economic conditions of women in Nigeria. They made the call at a public lecture and a day of tribute organized by the Faculty of the Social Sciences at Delta State University, Abraka, in honor of late Professor Atare Otite, a former dean of the faculty. Our reporter Sophie Asaye attended the event and will now present the details.
It is one of those rare events that bring principal officers of Delsu side by side with the staff and students of the university. Professor Atare Otite, an accomplished professor of political science with extensive research and contemporary political analysis, development, and gender studies, drew his last breath on August 2nd, 2024, and his demise has necessitated a public lecture and day of tribute. Speaking on the theme, fuel subsidy removal and the condition of women in Nigeria, Professor Nathaniel Umukoro, who was the guest lecturer, explained fuel subsidy as a financial support provided by the government to lower the cost of fuel for consumers. Professor Umukoro traced the history of fuel subsidy in Nigeria to the 1977 Price Control Act and the Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency, noting that while fuel subsidy was initially conceived out of good intentions, the removal of policy was partly necessitated by unsustainable costs, smuggling activities, corruption, and government climate change commitment. The professor of political science at Western Delta University, Ogara, asserted that while the negative impact of fuel subsidy is felt by all Nigerians, women deserve special attention and support from government and other social institutions.
My lecture focused on fuel subsidy removal and the condition of women in Nigeria today. Recently, we are all experiencing the high cost of petrol, and the summary of my lecture is that women are really feeling the impact because the informal sector in Nigeria today is dominated by women who operate different small and medium-scale enterprises. And most of these enterprises rely on petrol because of the deficit in the economic infrastructure, especially electricity supply. So by the time they find it difficult to purchase petrol to run their SMEs, most of them find it difficult to generate income to feed their families. While it is true that men are also affected, our focus is on women because they are affected differently, in the sense that they are always at home to care for the children. Some are widows, some are living with disabilities, some have children without support. So it's something really serious, and we propose social protection measures, especially the area of transportation and also healthcare, that can help to ameliorate the plight of women in this time of crisis.
Reacting to the lecture, the paper discussant submitted that women bear a substantial effect of fuel subsidy removal and also called for significant reforms that would empower women in the socio-economic space.
We know that movement of humans and goods will have increased costs, and nobody needs to be asked who bears that burden more in a household. It is the women. The women are the primary caregivers, providers of food, providers of water, and doing all the chores.
The informal sector, which holds the nation together, is dominated by women. And once these women have no access to energy, that is the beginning of economic disempowerment. And that is not only going to deepen poverty, but also going to widen the poverty net. From the angle of political economy, our governments have to look inward and see how we can boost local production. Then government can also genuinely introduce social safety nets. There should be social protection policies that will help. For instance, if you are taking away subsidy from fuel, you can subsidize health. You can subsidize agriculture, you can subsidize rent, you can provide and subsidize electricity.
Speaking on the life and times of late Professor Atare Otite, the Vice-Chancellor of Delsu, Professor Andy Egoinga, said the departed erudite scholar stood for truth, courage, and passion for humanity.
We must honor Professor Atare Otite for who he was. He was a patriot. I'm not a political scientist, so I will have difficulty classifying him ideologically. Maybe in the course of today, when they pay tributes and then the guest lecturer will be able to resolve that. Was he a leftist? Was he a center-left or rightist? But what I know is I stood for the truth. And he was always available. I didn't try to make permanent enemies. He loved the university system. And he wanted the best for the system. He was never afraid to speak out. He was somebody who was passionate about Delta State University.
Others who also spoke at the event, including the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Professor Sam Ogege, paid glowing tribute to the departed scholar.
Professor Atare Otite was not just an academic giant, he was a compassionate leader, a mentor, a role model, an inspiring figure to both students and staff. Beyond the walls of academia, Professor Atare Otite was a man of integrity and humility. He was deeply committed to social causes, often working on research that addressed critical societal issues.
Well, if an examination question says describe honesty and perfection, and a student is found with the photograph of Professor Otite or the name of the student will be charged for exam malpractice, because it's an epitome of humanity, honesty, kindness to humanity, and humility.
Professor Otite is a very jolly fellow, honest to the core. He is friendly to everybody, whether small, big, old, both to the academics and the non-teaching staff.
From Delta State University, Abraka, I am Sophie Ase, reporting for Delsu Echo.
Meanwhile, Professor Victor Jike has called on the Nigerian government to explore alternative measures to the country's dependence on fuel. Professor Jike spoke with Delsu Echo on Monday on the sideline of a public lecture and day of tribute organized by the Faculty of Social Sciences at Delta State University, Abraka, in honor of Professor Atare Otite. The professor of sociology specifically tasked the Nigerian government to explore compressed natural gas as an alternative to petrol. Let's hear him.
There's a lot of shortfall in terms of consequences of fuel subsidy removal for our people. I feel that the way forward is not just whether there should be subsidy or no subsidy. We should think about alternatives. First and foremost, CNG, compressed natural gas. Because the policy of the government for palliatives for the citizens is to give them buses that are driven by CNG. We have gas flaring all over the Niger Delta. If Nigerian tertiary institutions are very serious, they can concentrate their researches on how to harness gas flaring and use that as part of the CNG to power mass transit buses, and that will alleviate some of the suffering of our people. The second one, which I think is very important, is alternative energy sources. Palm oil, for example. Malaysia is using palm oil today to power their aircraft. Why? Because they came to Nigeria in 1963 and got seedlings from Nigeria and went back home, did their research, planted massively around their country, and today they are using palm oil, refined palm oil, to power their aircraft. If we do that, we can have an alternative to petroleum PMS. Then the other one, if you have been to Netherlands, you know that the Netherlands economy is based on wind technology. We have a lot of wind. We have a lot of wind to power our office, to power our cars, to power all kinds of things. Why are we not doing research in those regards? Then finally, you also find out that in the First Republic, just after colonialism, Ogogoro was referred to as illicit gin. Today we have people who can refine oil locally, modular refinery, driven by indigenous people. Why can't we work within the framework of the law and allow some people in the Niger Delta to ensure that they produce PMS, which will be sold at a cost to the ordinary people, so that they can benefit from the resource abundance of oil that they have in their own places.